Over the last few months, you've undoubtedly heard of the social unrest stemming from injustices and excessive force used by law enforcement. Today, we're joined by former police officer Charles D. Hayes and the author of Blue Bias to further understand the relationship between police officers and those they serve. Good morning, Charles. So it's no secret that there is prejudice in policing, as you've talked about in your book, that's swept our nation at this point and has also been the catalyst for the movements and demonstrations and overall unrest that we've seen across the country. So in your book, Blue Bias, an ex-cop turned philosopher examines the learning and resolve necessary to end hidden prejudice in policing. Tell us about how you landed on that title for the book and your experience in writing it.
Well, let me sort of start at the beginning. I'm 77 years old. I live in Wasilla, Alaska. I'm an ex-Marine and an ex-police officer. I was on the Dallas Police Department in the 1960s. I joined the department with over-the-top expectations and enthusiasm, and I burned out in about 4 years. And the reason that happened is because I didn't have the education to have a big picture perspective in order to handle seeing the worst in people all the time. So I've been writing books and essays about the value of self-education for more than 30 years. In 2009, when Henry Louis Gates Jr. had the incident with the police sergeant, I wrote a blog that was picked up by the LA Progressive, and I wound up having about 6 or 7 years worth of essays there. But I began thinking about this subject and reflecting on my police experience. A few years after I left the department, I developed an insatiable interest in policing and the psychology of policing. And I've been studying it for years, the pro and con literature about policing. And so this book is an attempt to help police officers avoid burnout, to reduce the incidence of excessive force, and to increase the respect among police officers and citizens.
And it's so necessary. You know, the studies that you're doing, the information that you're sharing is really important because in all cases, we're dealing with people who have feelings, people who have emotions, people who have bias just by nature, right? We all have some sort of subconscious bias. So how do you feel that subconscious bias plays a role in what we're experiencing in policing today?
Implicit bias is deeply embedded in American culture. We make assumptions from the time we're small children about what's going on in the world. When we're called on later to make a judgment, we rationalize towards what our experience is based on appearances, not what should be or what we think is the moral thing to do. We just gravitate towards it, and that's why it is so hard, and it takes generations to change opinion. But if you grow up in a culture where a group of people is stigmatized, it's so hard not to have been influenced by that. Even if you're a part of the group that is stigmatized, it's still hard not to be influenced by it.
And so in this day and age, and even in previous generations, parents have been tasked with preparing their children for interactions with law enforcement and how they can make sure that that interaction is peaceful and successful. So what suggestions do you have for parents and also for anyone who is interacting with police officers at this time?
Be courteous, do what you're told to do. If you have a complaint about the treatment, wait until after your incident is over. Police officers often become a victim of their own exposure. I mean, if you have your limbic system to the point of conflict, of fight or flight, enough times in a short period of time, there are physiological changes in the brain that happen with that. The amygdala will grow larger. You can become hypersensitive to insult or having your authority challenged. Some police groups call it a sense of entitlement. And you can find examples on YouTube of officers who just go ballistic with the slightest provocation. To me, it's up to their management, to their chiefs and deputy chiefs to keep an eye on that and to tell when a person is getting out of control. I mean, if you're an officer and you have sincere good intentions, but this is happening to you and you don't know it, then there's no way you're going to be able to deal with it.
And do you feel that this is really the basis for the excessive force that we're seeing? Why are we seeing this so often, and how do we eliminate it?
Well, for so many years, for decades and decades and decades, police officers had full autonomy. There was nothing, no evidence to refute a police report. And officers' word were taken as being true. And now that technology has come and we have evidence that shows that this is not exactly what happened, I think police officers over a long period of time didn't have to worry about the consequences. I mean, it was their word against somebody else's, and once that changed, I mean, I think they got sort of sloppy in the way they do things and just feeling like that they were going to be believed. So it just got out of control.
We've got about 30 seconds left, but I wanted to ask you very quickly. In many communities, we've reached a place of distrust between civilians and police. So how do we mend that relationship?
Well, it has to be goodwill on both parts. I mean, you have to try, and police officers have to reach out. It's easy to talk about community policing. It's hard. It's much harder. It takes a trust on both parts.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and to see the insights. I think it's important for people on both sides, law enforcement and civilians, to read your book to understand some of the background history that's led us to where we are and how we move forward, how we create strong communities right now, today. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
To learn more about Mr. Hayes' book, we will post more information on our website at WTVR.com/BTM.